She was 10 years of age when she announced to him that she would one day become his wife. He laughed, a genuine, unhurried sound, dipped his head in acknowledgement, and then forgot she existed entirely. She did not return the favor. Not at 15, not at 18, not across a full decade spent at a seminary in Bath, where his face surfaced unbidden during the stillest hours of her evenings. And when she finally arrived back in London at the age of 20, she brought with her only one question that demanded an answer. Had she spent 10 years devoted to a man, or merely to a memory? He was 40 years of age. He had informed his mother, his club, and every soul who dared to ask that he considered himself far too old to be selecting a bride. That the proper season for such undertakings had passed him by long ago. What he had never confessed to anyone, least of all himself, was a quieter, more unsettling truth. No woman had ever stirred in him the feeling he believed he was supposed to recognize. Until the evening a young woman stepped into his library with her eyes trained on the bookshelves rather than on him, and something in a neglected corner of his mind went profoundly still. Subscribe and leave a comment. Have you ever found yourself waiting for someone who had no idea you were there? There exist moments in a person's life so brief, so thoroughly ordinary in the living of them, that they pass without ceremony, without witness, without the faintest tremor of significance. A door left open, a name spoken by accident, a sentence finished before anyone thought to interrupt. The night of October the 17th in the year 1800 was precisely such a moment. It arrived dressed in candlelight and the scent of roasted pheasant, tucked neatly inside an evening the world had no cause to remember. Lady Whitmore's autumn dinner was, by every reliable account, among the finer gatherings of the season. The drawing room of Whitmore House on Grosvenor Square had been arranged with singular purpose, to dazzle people who already owned everything worth owning, the most difficult audience there is. Crystal caught the trembling glow of 50 candles and scattered it into a constellation of tiny reflections. Conversation drifted between courses with the measured elegance of a well-channeled river, deliberate, contained, never permitted to spill beyond its banks. Duke Maximilian Royce, the 9th Duke of Ashvale, arrived at precisely 7:30. He became the center of gravity in the room at once. This owed nothing to his vanity and everything to simple arithmetic. A gentleman of 30 years, unmarried, bearing one of the most ancient titles in England, and maintaining a fortune that required 3 separate accountants to manage. Such a man warps the atmosphere of any space he enters. The ladies smiled a fraction too wide. The mothers lifted their chins by careful, practiced degrees. Even the gentlemen adjusted their posture without quite realizing it, as though standing near such a figure demanded something straighter in the spine. Maximilian bore all of it with the particular patience that comes not from goodness of character, but from sheer repetition. He had no cause to believe this evening would differ from any other. He had been moving through drawing rooms like this one since the age of 19. He knew every shade of the performances on display, each hollow laugh, each glance cast with deliberate care from beneath artfully lowered lashes. He held no resentment toward any of it. He simply watched. And in watching, he had long since learned to keep a careful distance between himself and the manufactured warmth that everyone around him seemed so urgently determined to produce. Sometime after the second course, he freed himself from a relentless conversation about hunting estates and slipped into the corridor. The hallway held fewer candles than the drawing room. That was precisely its appeal. He stood beside the window at the far end, looking down at the square below, grateful for 30 seconds of silence, nothing more. He sensed her before he saw her. A small sound, not quite a gasp. Closer to the exhale of someone caught doing something they already knew they shouldn't be doing. He turned. She stood at the top of the servants' staircase, half swallowed by shadow. She had clearly come down from the upper floor, the one where the younger members of the household had been tucked away hours ago. 10 years old, perhaps, a white nightgown, dark hair spilling loose across her shoulders. Her eyes found his, and the look in them carried a stillness so absolute it separated her instantly from every soul he had spoken to that evening. Most children, caught wandering through a house full of adults, would have bolted or wept. This one simply watched him, weighed him, with the careful gravity of a serious mind encountering an unexpected problem, and then stepped forward into the candlelight, as though she had every right to occupy it. "You are the Duke." Not a question, a classification. He discovered with faint surprise that this did not displease him in the least. "I am, and you are most certainly not supposed to be in this part of the house." I couldn't sleep. She said it with the unshakable certainty of someone stating a plain truth that owed no one an apology. "The candles smell different when there are so many. Waxy. It comes up through the floorboards." He studied her. She held his gaze without a flicker of nervousness, without the performance every other person in that household had staged for him all evening. There was something quietly healing in her plainness. "Well then, what is your name?" "Ada Pemberton. Lady Whitmore is my aunt." A careful pause. "My mother says you are the most eligible gentleman in all of London." "Your mother is not the first to voice that opinion." "She also says you will never marry because you are far too proud to find happiness." Ada tipped her head to one side, her face free of malice, as though she were offering this intelligence as practical guidance rather than accusation. A sound left him. A sound he had not made in a very long time, a real laugh, short, unbidden, and entirely genuine. "She may well be right." Ada weighed his words for a moment. Then, with the pure sincerity that only children and the very old seem able to sustain, she looked up at him and announced, "When I am grown, I shall marry you." The warmth of that laughter still lived in his chest. He gave her a small bow, the kind a gentleman offers when he wishes to honor a declaration with gravity, not diminish it. "Then I shall have the distinct honor of awaiting your arrival, Miss Pemberton." She nodded, satisfied, and turned back toward the stairs. At the top she paused, glanced over her shoulder. "You should not stand by cold windows, you might catch a chill." And then she was gone, swallowed by the darkness above. Maximilian stood in the corridor a beat longer than he needed to. Then a solitary private smile crossed his lips, and he returned to the drawing room, the dinner party, and the life already arranged around him, like furniture in a house he had never truly chosen. By the following morning, he had forgotten her entirely. This is the part that matters. Ada Pemberton did not forget. 3 weeks after that dinner, she was enrolled at Miss Hartley's Seminary for Young Ladies in Bath, an institution that prided itself on shaping women of refinement, composure, and suitable ambitions. The school occupied a handsome Georgian building on a quiet street, ringed by gardens that were lovely and completely off limits to students from October through April. Bath was not London. The fashionable circles that gathered there were older, slower, threaded with a gentler energy, yet it sat far enough from Grosvenor Square that a 10-year-old girl could tend a private thought without unwanted questions, and near enough to the civilized world that she could grow into something more. She did grow, year by year, season by season, with the patient, deliberate quality that marked everything she undertook. She was not the prettiest girl at Miss Hartley's. Beauty ran thick in that world, showing itself in 100 different shapes. But Ada Pemberton possessed something rarer, something far more useful over time. She consumed books the way a flame consumes kindling, with hunger that never dulled. Her arguments arrived precise and layered, each one built with deliberate care. She had mastered silence. Not the silence of someone with nothing to offer, the silence of someone who understood, younger than most ever do, that knowing when to speak is its own form of power. She thought of Duke Maximilian Royce the way a sailor regards a fixed star on the horizon. Not obsession, navigation. He was never a fantasy she had spun from girlish longing. He was a point she had chosen when she was far too young to choose wisely, and then had chosen again, deliberately, with every year that followed. That was the piece she never revealed to anyone, the choosing. She understood with the sharp-eyed pragmatism that Miss Hartley's Seminary for Young Ladies had labored so hard to instill, and had, perhaps without meaning to, actually succeeded in planting, that he would not remember her. A man of the Duke of Ashvale's position moved through society the way a river passes through a valley. It shaped everything around it. It retained nothing of the individual stones. She had been a child of 10, glimpsed for a moment in a corridor. She was not foolish enough to believe she had been anything more than a small, forgettable pleasantry. But she was going back to London. Her parents had settled on the 1810 season for her debut. The letters her mother sent throughout the winter of 1809 hummed with plans, with arrangements, with the barely contained excitement of a woman who had dreamed of launching her daughter into society and could now feel that moment pressing close. Ada read those letters in her room at Miss Hartley's, by the window, with a stillness her mother would have found deeply suspicious had she been there to witness it. She felt no dread about the season, no flutter of worry over the dinners, the assemblies, the parade of would-be suitors. Her mind held one thing only, and it was this: she was going to see him again. Whatever followed from that, whatever the flesh and blood reality of him turned out to be, whatever distance stretched between the man and the memory, she would finally know. She would have her answer. She packed her trunk at the end of March 1810 with the precision of someone who had no plans to come back. 10 years. She had waited a full decade. And patience, she had learned at Miss Hartley's, was nothing like surrender. It was simply the discipline of waiting with open eyes. The Duke of Ashvale had not softened his position on marriage. If anything, he had hardened it. He was 40 years of age in the spring of 1810. 40. A number that his mother, the Dowager Duchess, had apparently circled on some invisible calendar and marked as a line that could not be crossed. She delivered her verdict at breakfast in January, with the calm certainty of a woman remarking on overcast skies. Maximilian, meanwhile, sat buried in his correspondence, wanting nothing more than to be left alone. You are far too old to endure another season without choosing a bride. People are starting to talk. People have always talked. He did not raise his eyes from his papers. It is their chief occupation. Maximilian. His name, spoken in his mother's particular tone, carried a weight that still, even at 40, forced him to listen. Quote, 16, He lowered his papers. He met her gaze with the expression he kept for conversations he meant to end quickly. Quote, 17, he said, every word placed like a stone in a wall. Quote, 18. The Dowager Duchess held his stare for a long, unbroken moment. Quote, 19. Quote, she said finally. Quote, 20. Quote, and she left the room, deploying the most powerful weapon in her arsenal. He sat with her parting words longer than pride should have allowed. He was no stranger to his own devices. A sharp eye had been his since boyhood. Time had only honed the blade. He knew his cynicism for what it was: a fortress built brick by deliberate brick, mortared with every season he had moved through without finding the thing he hadn't quite admitted he was looking for. He understood his mother was right. He simply found it easier to lie to himself about it. The spring season opened in April. He attended, as he always did, the assemblies, the dinners, the afternoon calls. All of it executed with the practiced exhaustion of a man who had mastered the art of showing up without ever arriving. He offered smiles. He danced once each evening. Usually the hostess or her eldest daughter, whichever woman would take the most pleasure from it and draw the least false hope. He left before midnight, the same ritual year upon year, a flawless performance of engagement that had slowly become impossible to distinguish from genuine disinterest. Lady Whitmore's spring dinner fell on the 22nd of April. It was the 14th time Maximilian had crossed that particular threshold. He arrived, drew immediate attention, endured it, then sought sanctuary in the library, a stolen breath of quiet between the soup and the fish courses, when the butler materialized in the doorway. 21, the man announced, his voice cast broadly across the room, as two young women followed him in from the anteroom. 22. Maximilian glanced up from the title page of a book he hadn't yet begun to read. She stood on the left, dark hair arranged with care, not loose, and something in the angle of her jaw, some particular quality of stillness about her, struck him like a word he recognized, but could not quite summon to his tongue. She was 20, composed with the deliberate poise of a woman who had spent years perfecting exactly that quality. And she was not looking at him. Her gaze had gone to the bookshelves. He found this almost absurdly disarming. Every soul he had encountered across a decade of seasons turned toward him the moment he entered a room, drawn as though by magnetic compulsion. This woman had walked into a room he already occupied, entirely aware of his presence. The butler had made certain of that, and chosen the bookshelves instead. He watched her eyes travel along the spines with unhurried, genuine curiosity. He caught the faint motion of her lips as she read the titles silently. He watched her head tilt toward one volume in particular, as if it had whispered something worth considering. Her sister murmured to her. Then she turned, slowly, without haste. Her gaze moved through the room and settled on him with neither the flutter nor the studied pretense he had grown accustomed to. Simply recognition, or something that wore its face. Your Grace. The greeting was calibrated with such precision that it communicated courtesy and absolutely nothing beyond it. He inclined his head. Miss Pemberton, you have recently returned from Bath, I understand. 10 years spent in Bath, a breath of silence. Yes. Something shifted inside him. Pemberton, Lady Whitmore's niece. He turned the arithmetic over in his mind, like pressing a key into a lock that almost fits. Feeling the mechanism resist, the tumblers catching, nearly engaging, but not falling into place. He did not reach the answer, not yet. He only stood there in the library of Whitmore House, an unopened book in his hand, while Ada Pemberton regarded him with those 20-year-old eyes that seemed to be waiting for something he hadn't yet grasped he was meant to give. He found himself thinking about her for 3 days after that dinner. This unsettled him considerably. He was not a man who lingered on people. They crossed paths 7 times over the following 3 weeks. Maximilian counted each one with care, then was irritated with himself for keeping the tally. The Hargreave Ball on the 1st of May, the afternoon concert at Mrs. Drummond's residence on the 7th, a chance encounter at Hatchard's on the 9th. He had walked in looking for political pamphlets and found her at the far end of the fiction section, absorbed in a volume she made no move to set down when he appeared. He had to clear his throat. She glanced up without a flicker of self-consciousness and asked what he thought of Fielding. He held no particular opinion on Fielding, yet somehow standing there he began constructing one. He started accepting invitations he had previously refused. He told himself it was coincidence, then curiosity, then a sensible broadening of his social duties. By the 3rd lie, he had stopped bothering with justifications altogether and simply showed up. The other young ladies of the season noticed. His mother noticed. The men at his club made remarks he parried with 20 years' worth of practiced deflection. Society, that great collective organism, observed that the Duke of Ashvale, the man who had pronounced himself too old and too spent to begin anything new, was materializing with unsettling frequency wherever a certain Miss Pemberton happened to be. Society found this enormously entertaining, as it always does. Ada, for her part, gave him almost nothing to work with. This, he was slowly realizing, was entirely intentional. She was pleasant in the way an intelligent woman elects to be pleasant, attentive, engaged, genuinely curious about their exchange. But she granted him not one extra degree of anything. No surplus warmth, no performed availability, no loaded glances designed to draw him further in. She treated him with perfect uniformity, as exactly what he was, a gentleman she had encountered at a dinner party. Nothing more. She made no acknowledgement whatsoever of the pointed attention he kept directing her way. He found this maddening in a fashion he could not quite name. It was at the Ashworth Musicale, on the 14th of May, that he finally contrived to place himself beside her long enough for a real conversation. The musicale was the kind of event where the music existed mainly as cover, an excuse for 50 people to crowd into one room and speak volumes with their eyes while pretending to listen to a soprano. He had claimed the aisle seat next to her before she grasped his intent, and this afforded him a small, probably undeserved, flicker of satisfaction. You do not strike me as a gentleman who enjoys music. Her voice was low. She did not look at him. The soprano was working through an opening passage. I enjoy certain kinds of music. His reply came just as quietly. This particular evening, I find I am enjoying myself considerably more than usual. She said nothing. The soprano began Handel, a ceremonial piece, perhaps too grave for the atmosphere of the room. Around them, listeners arranged their faces into expressions of deep concentration, as though laboring to appear absorbed. You attended Miss Hartley's in Bath, he said. 10 years. from 1800. It was a statement of fact, not a question, and she received it as one. I left in March of 1801. He turned the number over in his mind. He had been 30 in 1800. He had attended Lady Whitmore's dinner in October of that year. A corridor, guttering candles, a 10-year-old girl in a white nightgown, dark hair loose around her shoulders, standing at the top of the servants' staircase. He turned toward her. She was watching the soprano. Her profile was composed, perfectly, completely still, revealing nothing at all. And yet there was something in that stillness, something that did not quite match the word calm. It raised the fine hairs along his forearms. Miss Pemberton, a pause. Have we met before this season? A beat. Not hesitation, a decision being made. Then she turned her head and looked at him with those dark, steady eyes that had kept their patience for 10 years. Once, she said, or a very long time ago. And she returned her gaze to the music. He did not sleep that night. He lay in the darkness of Ashvale House in Berkeley Square, staring at the ceiling, pulling at a thread of memory he could not quite seize. Something in a corridor, the smell of candle wax, a laugh that had caught him off guard, a voice carrying a composure far too deep for its age. He seized it at last. 4 in the morning, the thread snapping loose in a single pull. And then he remembered. A small girl, barefoot, possessed of a gravity no child should carry so naturally, dark hair tumbling around her shoulders, those eyes lifted to his with the identical stillness that Ada Pemberton carried into every room she entered. No self-consciousness. Not the faintest awareness that what she was saying was extraordinary. When I grow up, I shall marry you, and he had laughed, promised, as one promises a child, lightly, carelessly, to wait. He lay still for a long while after that, turning the memory over like a coin worn smooth on one side. He had laughed and let it go. She, at 10 years of age, had she held on? Had she carried it forward like a compass bearing? He had no way of knowing. She had given him nothing to work with, nothing except that single word, once, spoken with the patience of someone who had been rehearsing that precise form of restraint for years. He told himself it meant nothing. Children say remarkable things and forget them by tea time. He settled on this conclusion with absolute conviction, and then lay awake until dawn crept gray across the ceiling, his thoughts circling back to her hands, folded with such deliberateness in her lap during that earlier encounter, and the particular way she studied bookshelves when she thought no one was watching. Lady Drummond's garden party fell on the 28th of May. It was exactly the kind of afternoon the English social calendar seemed to have engineered for one specific purpose: pressing people into proximity while offering no acceptable excuse for private conversation. The grounds teemed with guests, perhaps 80 of them, drifting across lawns kept sharp as velvet beneath a sky that had, for once in late May, chosen cooperation over its customary fickleness. Small tables bore lemonade and pastries that nobody troubled themselves to eat. Near the rose border, a string quartet sent melodies floating across the grass, agreeable enough to please, undemanding enough to ignore. He found Ada among the wisteria. She stood turned slightly from the crowd, her gaze fixed on the climbing vine with a concentration he had come to recognize. That same focused absorption she brought to everything she examined, so different from the shallow curiosity most people offered the world. Her sister was somewhere across the lawn, talking brightly among a cluster of younger guests. For the first time in his memory of Ada Pemberton, she was entirely alone. He was moving toward her before the decision had fully formed in his mind. She turned. Sunlight struck her face full on, and she did not flinch from it, did not raise a hand, simply stood in the light. Something behind his ribs pulled tight, an unfamiliar, unnameable thing. He began. She waited, utterly composed. He wanted to say something direct, something honest, something that might span the distance between what he now understood and what she so carefully withheld. Instead, he asked whether she found the wisteria pleasing. The corner of her mouth shifted. Not a smile, something that lived next door to one. Quote 38, she replied. Quote 39. He looked at the wisteria, then back at her. Quote 40. Quote 41, she said. No apology in her voice, A plain fact plainly stated. Silence gathered between them, and like every silence they had shared with increasing frequency, this one held far more than the absence of sound. Around them, the party whirled on, laughter, performance, the practiced choreography of society. Neither of them gave it a moment's notice. I recalled something, he said. The words had not been planned, they surfaced on their own, and he let them go. October of 1800, the corridor at Whitmore House. You were supposed to be in bed. Her expression shifted, but subtly. It was not surprise, it was the precise opposite. A deep stillness overtook her, the kind that belongs to someone who has been waiting for exactly this collision and now refuses to flinch from it. She held his gaze for a stretch of time that seemed to contain a dozen unspoken conversations layered one atop another. You remembered, she said. Her voice gave away nothing. I regret not recalling it sooner. You had no reason to, she answered plainly. I was a child. Children say things. The question clawed at the inside of his chest, demanding release. He wanted to say it outright. Did you mean it? Does it still hold true? Did you come back to London on the strength of a promise I tossed carelessly into a corridor when you were 10 years old, and I was too blind to understand that words spoken to you might land like anchors? He said none of it. 4 decades of disciplined restraint rendered a direct question as reckless as dropping one's sword in the thick of battle. Instead, he managed, quote, 48, quote, 49, she confirmed. The near smile returned, stronger this time, and carrying something instructive in its edges. Their exchange broke apart, as their exchanges so often did, at the intrusion of others bearing separate purposes. Lady Ashworth appeared with a young lord in tow who required an introduction. The closeness between them scattered like fog slipping through an open casement. Yet Maximilian lingered in the garden long after Ada had been drawn away. His gaze rested on the wisteria. He turned over the word __, quote, _50, __ in his mind, and what it signified coming from a woman who chose her words the way a jeweler sets stones, with full knowledge of their worth. By the opening week of June, quiet speculation had crystallized into settled conviction. The Duke of Asheville was courting Miss Ada Pemberton. This conclusion, correct in its destination if imprecise about its origins, provoked every shade of reaction society could supply. Mothers of eligible unwed daughters nursed private disappointment behind composed smiles. Young men who had begun circling Ada with tentative interest now pressed their attentions harder, sensing by instinct that the window they had glimpsed might close sooner than expected. Lady Whitmore conducted her days wrapped in unmistakable self-congratulation. She claimed credit for a blossoming attachment she had neither engineered nor, in honest truth, would ever have foreseen. Ada's mother arrived from the country in the second week of June. She had been summoned by a sequence of meticulously phrased yet pointedly oblique letters from Lady Whitmore, the sort that could only herald significant news. The moment she stepped through the door, she read the situation with the sharp eye of a woman who had studied society's machinery for 30 years. At the first opportunity, she took her daughter's arm and asked for a frank account. Ada did not answer immediately, not from reluctance, from care. He is exactly what I expected, she said at last, and nothing at all like what I imagined. Her mother waited. He keeps himself guarded. He has built a tightly governed world around himself and inhabits it with what appears to be satisfaction. I do not think he can voice a desire without immediately constructing fortifications around that same longing. Most men his age share that affliction, her mother observed, practical as ever. I know, Ada replied, measured and quiet. What concerns me is whether he has already decided the answer is no, before allowing himself to understand the question. Her mother studied her daughter. 20 years old now, a decade of steady endurance behind her, and that innate thread of resolve that had been visible even at 10, even shivering in corridors, wrapped in nothing but a nightgown. She said nothing. Sometimes silence is answer enough. Elsewhere, a young viscount by the name of Hereford had resolved to set caution aside. Lord Edmund Hereford, 28 years of age, possessed an uncomplicated handsomeness, a pleasant estate in Shropshire, and a temperament that might generously be called straightforward, or less generously, simple. Through those first weeks of the season, he had watched Ada from a careful distance. Then, over the following fortnight, he had narrowed that distance with quiet, deliberate precision. By the 9th of June, a card party at Greystone, his intentions had grown unmistakable. No room left for misreading. He claimed the seat beside her at the card table and held it for 3 full hours. He was attentive, engaging, genuinely curious about what she thought, and entirely unafraid to say plainly what he felt. Ada discovered she actually liked him. Lord Hereford carried an ease about him, an unguarded warmth that required no excavation, no careful chipping through walls of cultivated distance. He was open where Maximilian was sealed, simple where Maximilian was labyrinthine. Maximilian arrived late to the card party. It took him roughly 30 seconds to understand everything. He had never considered himself a jealous man. This was not vanity, it was a conclusion drawn from 4 decades of evidence. The emotion had simply never surfaced. He discovered it now. Standing in the Greystone cardroom doorway, watching Lord Hereford lean close, whispering something that pulled a laugh from Ada, he learned that his long-held conviction had merely been waiting for its proper catalyst. What moved through him was deeply unsettling. Not an emotion he could master with composure. Not one he could deflect with a perfectly turned phrase. It struck like flint against stone and lodged itself somewhere deep in his chest, burning. He joined the card game on the far side of the room. He conversed. He smiled when smiles were expected. And every 10 minutes, his gaze drifted across the room. Lord Hereford, still there. Ada, still laughing. The burning did not fade. He left at 11 without speaking to her. He walked home through the dimming June evening and arrived at Ashvale House in a state of mind he was far too proud to name aloud, but far too perceptive to misunderstand. He shut himself in his study, sank into the chair behind his desk, and for the first time, without flinching, examined the path he was walking. He was 40 years old. He had told his mother, told himself, told every well-meaning soul who dared to ask. The right time had passed. He had built a remarkably sturdy fortress of resignation and dwelled inside it for years. Not happiness, precisely, but insulation, a protection from the specific ache that comes with wanting something beyond reach. And now there was Ada Pemberton, 20 years old, a girl's declaration from a decade ago still hovering in the silence between them, unacknowledged and unresolved. And there was a young Viscount, open, uncomplicated, unguarded, who would give her a straightforward life and affection that asked nothing difficult of either of them. He wanted her, not as some abstract ideal, not as a pleasant distraction from an otherwise predictable season. He wanted her specifically, precisely, the particular way she tilted her head over a book, the deliberation with which she chose her words, the sharp attention she gave to wisteria, her absolute refusal to grant him a single thing he had not earned. 6 weeks he had been circling this truth. He was done circling. The question that remained was what he intended to do about it, and whether a decade of calculated stillness had already cost him his chance. On the morning of June the 15th, significant news arrived at the Pemberton household. Lord Edmund Hereford had sent a formal letter to Ada's father, currently away from London, expected back within the week, declaring his serious interest in her. Nothing was official yet, no decisions had been made, but the letter existed, and Lady Whitmore shared its contents with Ada over breakfast, a proprietary satisfaction settling across her features, as though the mere closing of a chapter constituted a satisfactory ending all on its own. Ada read the letter, set it down, finished her breakfast. She thought about Lord Hereford, his easy warmth, his estate in Shropshire, where the wisteria probably wound around perfectly sensible trellises, asking nothing complicated of anyone. She considered how such a life might be genuinely wonderful. And then her mind turned to Maximilian Royce, the man who had remembered her at 4 in the morning, 3 full weeks after that musical performance, and who had apologized for taking so long. The man who, for 6 weeks running, had orbited her with the careful deliberation of someone unsure whether he had any right to draw close. A man who had declared, publicly, repeatedly with near theatrical conviction that he was far too old to be choosing a bride, and yet in that same breath had appeared wherever she happened to be with the reliable certainty of a compass swinging north. She had been patient long enough. The Langley afternoon reception on the 16th of June was a sprawling, unhurried affair. Roughly 30 guests moved through 2 drawing rooms and a conservatory, the kind of gathering where private words could be exchanged without attracting notice. Ada arrived alongside her sister and mother, traded pleasantries with a handful of acquaintances, and then, when the moment opened, she crossed into the conservatory. She knew he would be there. Maximilian always gravitated toward the quieter margins of any social event, and conservatories offered the most defensible of those margins. He stood near the palm trees, his gaze fixed on the small walled garden beyond the glass. He turned as she entered. Something flickered across his expression. Relief, she thought, or its nearest cousin. Then his composure resettled, smooth and practiced, like a curtain pulled shut. She stopped a few feet from him. The conservatory was empty of other guests. Through the glass panes, the garden stretched tranquil and green beneath the afternoon sun. "I need to say something to you," she began, "and I need you to let me finish before you respond." A single nod. She drew a breath, not from nerves, but from the same focused precision she brought to everything. "Did I return to London because of you?" she said. "Not entirely. The season was always part of the plan. I was always going to come. But I came willingly, without dread. Because for 10 years, the one thing I wanted most was to stand in the same room as you at the age of 20 and discover whether what I felt at 10 had been a child's invention or something real." He did not move. "I have spent these 6 weeks in your company, and the answer is that it was real, which presents an inconvenience. I understand the inconvenience. I understand that you are 40 years old and have thoroughly, publicly, and with remarkable consistency, concluded that you are too old and too fixed in your habits for any of this." Her gaze held his without wavering. "And yet here you are, precise, deliberate. Lord Hereford has made his intentions known to my father. He arrives from the country this week. I have not decided anything, and I will not decide without a pause, a breath, a clean beginning. I have waited 10 years for you to truly see me, not the child in the corridor, me. I am standing here now saying exactly what I mean, because I have used up all my patience, and I have no more time for it." Her voice shifted, not in volume but in heat, like a flame dropping lower without going out. "So," she finished, "choose me now, or let me go." The conservatory held its silence. Somewhere deeper in the house, a door swung open. A sudden ripple of laughter reached them from the drawing room. The door closed. Quiet returned. He looked at her, and she watched something move inside him. A deep interior rearrangement she could not name but could not mistake. 40 years of carefully built detachment meeting something it was never designed to withstand. He opened his mouth, closed it. An expression passed over his face, unguarded, almost raw, something she had never seen from him before. And then he said her name. Nothing more. "Ada." The word came stripped of every layer of composure he had ever worn. "You were 10 years old." His voice carried a roughness she had never heard. You could not have decided at 10, she said. "I decided at 10, and I decided again at 15, and at 18." And she had made her decision that morning before arriving. Her gaze never wavered. How many times must someone choose the same path before it carries real weight? He gave no answer. She hadn't expected one. Not yet, not while everything she'd said still hung in the air between them. She let it sit, gave it the room it required. "I will be at Lady Whitmore's residence tonight. Then my father arrives. And after that, I remember everything. The candles. You told me not to stand by cold windows, that I would catch a chill. I have thought about that every single day for the past 6 weeks. And I did not understand what it meant until roughly 2 hours ago. I laughed. You said something true, and I laughed. And I forgot. And I have been a fool for 10 years in ways I'm only beginning to count. I am 40 years old, and I have spent a great deal of effort persuading myself, and everyone around me, that wanting something was no longer available to me. I was wrong. Specifically and completely wrong about this. About you. I told you I would wait for you. I said it as a jest in a corridor when I was 30. Foolish, unguarded, utterly blind to the truth of my own words. I should like to say it now, and mean it, if you will allow me. I've been waiting 10 years for this. Will you permit me to speak with your father when he arrives? Yes. You should go back upstairs. It is well past midnight, and I have already compromised your reputation by roughly 10 separate measures. You knocked on the front door at midnight without a hat. My mother is going to be insufferable about this. Mine already is, Your Grace. You ought to have a hat made for such occasions. You'll catch your death. His gaze held hers. Here stood a woman, barely 20, who had carried the weight of a 10-year-old's earnest vow across an entire decade and was now handing it back to him, whole, unhurried. Something opened in his expression, a rawness seldom if ever seen. I shall have several made, he said. They were wed in August. A quiet ceremony in the chapel at Ashvale Park, Maximilian's ancestral country seat in Wiltshire, where the wisteria clinging to the southern wall had been embracing the old stone since 1743 and showed no intention whatsoever of letting go. The Dowager Duchess wept, an indulgence she might have found undignified had she not been so thoroughly pleased. Ada's mother wept harder still, having long since decided this particular display of emotion was her absolute right. Lord Edmund Hereford sent a letter of generous congratulation, which Ada read once and set aside, her respect for him undiminished. He was, she reflected, exactly as he appeared. A rare thing among many. She hoped, with genuine sincerity, that he would find someone truly worthy of his regard. Society, as it always does, began to talk. They called it the most peculiar match of the decade. The Duke of Ashvale, who had declared himself too old to choose a bride, wedding a woman 20 years his junior, the niece of Lady Whitmore, a graduate of the Bath Seminary, a woman of no great fortune and no remarkable lineage, save for the one she had quietly, steadily cultivated over the span of 10 years. The whispers came fast, then softened, and eventually they stopped altogether. Every soul who crossed paths with the Duke and Duchess of Ashvale reported the same unmistakable thing. The man who had built his entire identity upon an unbreakable stillness in her presence was wholly, irreversibly at rest. His laughter carried a different timbre. His posture in any gathering had shifted at its foundation. The fortifications he had spent decades constructing were crumbling, and in their place stood open windows. The kind that appear only when a person stops resisting what they have always wanted. Ada needed no one to tell her this. She lived inside this transformation every single day, and it remained as real, as staggering as it had been on that one decisive night. September had come, and they were settled in the library at Ashvale House. She was lost in a book. He was occupied with his letters. Around them hung the easy silence that had become the very weave of their life together. Then, without preamble, he looked up and spoke. She lifted her gaze from the page. As I understand it, that is a very tender age to make such a commitment. It is, she conceded, regarding him across the room with the same unshakable composure she had carried through 10 winters in Bath and one particularly unforgettable London season. But I reaffirm it every year. Surely that counts for something. He watched her, this man who had, with the slow deliberation of someone unlearning a lifelong discipline, taught himself to let his feelings simply rise to the surface. It counts for everything, he said. A smile broke across her face, not the measured, carefully managed expression she had deployed throughout the season, but the full, defenseless one, the one she had always kept only for him. He folded the letter beneath his hand, set it aside, his afternoon's correspondence abandoned, his presence given entirely. Even now, months deep into their marriage, this absolute attentiveness remained what she treasured most about being his wife. The man who had spent 40 years perfecting distance had learned, with remarkable skill, the art of truly being there. Beyond the library glass, London carried on with its autumn rituals. The social season had ended. Its assemblies, its balls, its card parties, those elaborate performances of interest and availability all folded away until the following year. Autumn was rolling down from the north, burnishing the park's leaves to copper and rust, bringing with it the smell of damp soil and wood smoke, casting that particular English light that turns every ordinary scene into something a painter would weep to capture. Inside the library, the Duchess of Asheville returned to her novel. The Duke of Asheville returned to his correspondence. But after only 4 minutes, he set the pages aside again, rose, and crossed the room to sit beside his wife on the settee. Before the summer of 1810, this would have been unthinkable for the ninth Duke of Asheville. Now he performed it with the effortless ease of a man who has finally located his true place in the world. She rested her head against his shoulder, her eyes never leaving the page. He received the gesture without a word, a language complete unto itself. Some promises are made at 30 and kept for a lifetime. Some truths ring clear at 10 and grow only more resonant at 20. And some loves are so unwavering, so exact, so unmistakable from their very first breath, that the years between are not a delay at all, merely the time it takes for the slower of two hearts to finally arrive. By the time Ada and Maximilian settled into life at Asheville Park, the wisteria along its southern facade had been climbing for 67 years. It had long passed the point where anyone could separate stone from vine.